"I need a favor," she said at 2 a.m., and something in her voice made me forget she could have a son my age. "Hello, I'm Jamie, 25, coding through nights while the city sleeps. 6 months in this loft, I'd only known her as heels clicking past my door. Now she stood there, no makeup, oversized sweatshirt, holding expensive wine like an apology. I stepped aside without thinking. That's when I noticed her hands were shaking. She'd never looked more beautiful than she did terrified. In my doorway. "It's about my presentation," she started, but we both knew it wasn't. "But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world." I had lived in the converted loft building for 6 months before that night. 6 months of coding until dawn, of existing more in screens than reality. The startup had hired me specifically for the night shift debugging code while California slept, so their morning would start with clean commits and resolve tickets. It was perfect for someone like me who had always felt more comfortable in the quiet hours when the world softened its edges. You get to know a building differently at night. During the day, it was all exposed brick and industrial chic, the kind of place real estate agents called authentic urban living. But after midnight, it became a collection of sounds and absences. The settling of old wood, the distant hum of the heating system, the whisper of traffic 13 stories below. I knew my neighbors mainly through these nocturnal signatures. The med student in 3A who stress-baked at 1 a.m., filling the hallway with the scent of chocolate chip cookies. The musician in 5C whose muffled bass lines vibrated through my ceiling until he finally got soundproofing installed. And then there was 4B. I heard her before I ever saw her, the precise click of heels in the morning, always at 7:15. The same confident rhythm when she returned, usually around 6:30. Sometimes later, but always with that same purposeful stride. In elevator encounters, she wore tailored blazers and carried leather portfolios, her perfume lingering after. She stepped out something elegant that reminded me of autumn. Dark hair usually swept up, reading glasses hanging from a chain when she checked her phone. She had the kind of presence that made the small elevator feel smaller. We did the neighbor dance of polite nods and murmured hellos, but never actually spoke. I figured she saw me as the disheveled programmer kid who probably lived on energy drinks and takeout. She wasn't entirely wrong. That night, it was a Tuesday in October, I was deep in a particularly stubborn bug. The kind that makes you question every life choice that led you to staring at brackets and semicolons at 2 in the morning. The coffee maker was burbling its third pot of the night, and I had that specific tunnel vision that comes from too many hours of debugging. The knock was so soft I almost missed it. 2:17 a.m., my monitor helpfully displayed. I waited, wondering if I had imagined it. Then it came again, gentle but insistent, like whoever was knocking was committed to the action but not entirely sure about it. I pushed back from my desk, joints cracking in protest. Through the peephole, the hallway light caught her in profile, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. Gone was the sharp professional armor. Instead, she wore what looked like an old university sweatshirt, her hair loose around her shoulders. She held a bottle of wine, and something in her posture made her seem smaller than usual. "I know it's late," she said to the door, her voice carefully controlled. "But I saw your light under the door, and I need a favor. Here's the thing about living mostly at night. You develop a different relationship with time. 2 a.m. doesn't feel late so much as it feels like the heart of things when pretenses wear thin and truth sits closer to the surface." And something in her voice, some current under that deliberate steadiness, made me unlock the door without hesitation. She looked up as I opened it, and I caught the moment of relief in her eyes before she composed herself. The sweatshirt was Northwestern, worn soft at the edges, and her feet were bare except for purple striped socks. The wine bottle was already open. "I'm sorry," she said, and I noticed how she was trying to keep her tone light, casual. "I know this is strange. I'm Mary from 4B. Though I suppose you knew that part." Standing there in my doorway, she looked Both younger and older than she did, in the elevator more real somehow, like a photograph coming into focus. The hallway light caught the silver threading through her dark hair, and there was something vulnerable in how she held herself, like someone trying very hard to seem like they weren't trying at all. I knew, with the strange clarity that sometimes comes in these liminal hours, that this wasn't really about whatever favor she was about to ask. This was about something else, something that had driven her to knock on a younger neighbor's door in the middle of the night, wearing old college clothes and carrying open wine. "I'm Jamie," I said, stepping back from the doorway. "Come in. Whatever you need, I'm probably going to say yes anyway." My apartment wasn't meant for guests. The furniture was all function over form, a desk that was really just a door on sawhorses, mismatched kitchen stools from a closing sale, and a couch that doubled as my occasional bed when coding marathons left me too drained to make it to the bedroom. But Mary didn't seem to notice or mind as she stepped inside, her sock-clad feet silent on the hardwood floor. "My internet went down about 20 minutes ago," she explained, clutching the wine bottle like an anchor. "I have a video presentation to our Tokyo office at 5 a.m., and all my files are stuck on a cloud drive I can't access. I noticed your light and remembered overhearing you mention something about programming in the elevator last month." Her voice trailed off, and I caught this slight tremor in it, the kind that comes when someone is holding themselves together through sheer force of will. I moved toward my desk, clearing space on the counter that separated my kitchen from the living area. "Let me grab my laptop," I said, already unplugging it from my main setup. "We can hardwire it to my connection. What cloud service are you using?" She rattled off technical details with the careful precision of someone who had learned them for work rather than interest. As I set up the laptop, she hovered nearby, still apologizing. "I'm so sorry about this. I wouldn't normally, I know. How inappropriate this is, showing up at this hour." "It's fine," I assured her, typing in commands. "This is practically midday for me." I glanced up to catch her small smile of relief. Besides, tech emergencies don't exactly keep office hours. While waiting for her login screen, she set the wine bottle on the counter. It was a good Cabernet, the kind you save for special occasions or dire emergencies. "I brought this as a thank you," she said, then added with a self-deprecating laugh. "Though I'm not sure if this qualifies as a celebration or a crisis. Why not both?" I suggested, reaching for wine glasses. I had exactly 2 wedding gifts from my cousin that had somehow survived 3 moves. We can toast to technical difficulties and unexpected solutions. She accepted the glass, and our awkward toast clinked softly in the pre-dawn quiet. The download bar crawled across the screen, maddeningly slow despite my fiber connection. Mary took a sip of wine, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "Your place is surprisingly organized," she observed, looking around. When I was your age," she caught herself, a flash of discomfort crossing her face. You've made it very functional." "The benefit of having no life outside of coding," I said lightly, trying to ease her obvious embarrassment about the age comment. "Plus, most of my chaos is digital." She nodded, fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I used to be organized, before the ... She paused, then continued with careful corporate phrasing. "Before the recent restructuring of my personal life." I recognized that language, the way people translate painful things into business speak to make them feel more manageable. My sister did the same thing during her divorce, calling it a transition period instead of what it was, the dismantling of a life she'd spent 8 years building. "Restructuring takes time," I offered, watching the progress bar inch forward, "and usually requires some temporary chaos." Mary looked at me sharply, then softly. "Yes, exactly." Though I wasn't expecting quite so much temporary chaos at 2 in the morning before a major client presentation. She took another sip of wine. "I should be more prepared than this. I used to be more prepared than this. Technology exists specifically to fail at the worst possible moments," I said. "It's like a law of nature." That earned a genuine laugh. and I noticed how it transformed her face, erasing some of the careful control she carried. She relaxed slightly on the kitchen stool, no longer perched like she might flee at any moment. "I appreciate this," she said quietly, gesturing at the laptop. "Not everyone would be so kind to a stranger with an emergency." "We're not exactly strangers," I pointed out. "We've had at least 6 months of elevator nods. That's practically a friendship in city terms." Her smile at that was warm and a little sad. "I suppose you're right. Though I should probably know more about my friends than their coding schedule and coffee preferences." The download continued its glacial progress while Mary swirled the wine in her glass. 20 years, she said softly, almost to herself. That's how long I was married. It didn't end dramatically, no affairs, no screaming matches, just ... erosion. Like waves wearing down a cliff until one day you look up and realize everything's different. I nodded, letting her talk. Sometimes people just need someone to listen, especially at 2 in the morning when the world feels less solid. "Sorry." She caught herself. "You probably don't want to hear about all this." "I don't mind," I said, checking the progress bar. "Sometimes it's easier to talk to someone who isn't involved." She smiled at that, tugging absently at the sleeve of her oversized sweatshirt. I tried not to stare at how different she looked. From her usual polished self-hair loose around her shoulders, minimal makeup, wearing what looked like ancient university gear. She caught me looking and laughed, the sound startling us both with its genuineness. "I know, I'm a mess," she said, but there was warmth in her voice. "Quite a change from the suits and heels, right?" "It's nice," I said before I could stop myself. "I mean, it suits you, both versions do." She studied me for a moment. "You're what, 25? "Yeah, just turned 25 in March." She took another sip of wine. "My son is almost your age." The way she emphasized almost made something shift in the air between us. "He's 23, finishing grad school in California." I felt the weight of that almost settling in my chest. It was deliberate, careful, like she wanted to acknowledge the elephant in the room without actually pointing at it. The realization that she'd been aware of me too, maybe even noticed me noticing her, made my pulse quicken. "What about you?" she asked, smoothly changing the subject. "All these late nights, living like a cybermonk." "Most people your age are out living their lives, not hiding behind screens at 2 a.m. "Code makes sense," I said, watching the progress bar tick past 70%. "It does what you tell it to do." "People are ... I trailed off, searching for the right words. "Complicated?" "Unpredictable." "With code, if something goes wrong, you can usually figure out why. People don't come with debug logs." She laughed again, softer this time. "No, we certainly don't. Though sometimes I wish we did." The laptop chimed, signaling the download was complete. Mary set down her wine and moved closer to look at the screen. Her shoulder brushed against mine as I leaned in to show her where the files had saved, and neither of us pulled away from the contact. "Here," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Let me show you how to set up the presentation mode." I was acutely aware of her perfume softer now, mixed with what might have been fabric softener from her sweatshirt and the slight warmth. Where our arms touched, her fingers hovered over the touchpad, not quite trembling. "Show me again. I want to make sure I get it right." I walked her through the steps one more time, both of us maintaining that careful point of contact, as if moving would break whatever delicate thing was building in the space between us. I pulled my external monitor closer, angling it so Mary could see better. "Let's do a quick test run of everything," I suggested, keeping my voice steady despite the lingering warmth from our contact. "Make sure the video and audio connections work before the actual call." She nodded, straightening her posture even in the oversized sweatshirt. I watched her click through the settings with precise movements, her earlier vulnerability giving way to focused determination. The clock on my screen read 3:45 in the morning, 90 minutes until her call with Tokyo. "Perfect," she murmured, advancing through her slides one final time. Every few moments, she'd glance my way with an expression I couldn't quite decode. Something between gratitude and something else. Something that made my chest feel tight. I can step away, offered, gesturing toward my bedroom. Give you some space to practice.
Actually,
She hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Would you mind staying? Your presence is calming, somehow. If that's not too strange to say. Not strange at all. I meant it. Want to move to the couch? Might be more comfortable than these stools. We relocated to my small living area, the laptop balanced between us on the coffee table. I sat at what felt like a respectful distance while she began her presentation. The marketing director I'd glimpsed in the elevator emerged fully now, even in university sweats. Her voice took on a quiet authority, her gestures became precise, and her occasional glances at me carried a hint of professional assessment. I found myself genuinely impressed by the content, something about an eye-driven market analysis that went way over my head. But she made it sound fascinating. More than that, I was struck by how she'd transformed without changing clothes. How confidence could reshape a person so completely. At 5 o'clock sharp, the incoming call notification chimed. Mary took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and connected to Tokyo. I slipped quietly into the kitchen, giving her space while staying visible in case of technical issues. The coffee maker's soft gurgle provided background noise as her voice filled my apartment with terms like market, penetration, and algorithmic forecasting. She was flawless. Even through my limited understanding of marketing, I could tell she had them engaged. Questions came through clearly, and she handled them with the same assured grace she'd shown in practice. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, the motion automatic as I found myself drawn into her rhythm. 40 minutes later, she closed the laptop with finality. For a moment, she just sat there, eyes closed, shoulders slowly relaxing. When she opened them again, exhaustion showed clearly on her face, but so did triumph. I couldn't have done this without you, she said softly, turning toward me. The professional polish faded, leaving something more raw and honest in its place. Neither of us moved. The moment stretched, delicate as spun glass, and I realized with sudden clarity that neither of us wanted her to leave. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Coffee? I offered, lifting my mug slightly. I make a decent brew. And honestly, after watching that performance, I think you've earned it. A smile tugged at her lips. I should probably try to sleep. But you're too wired? Exactly. She stood, smoothing her sweatshirt in an unconscious gesture. Coffee sounds perfect, actually. I doubt I could sleep now if I tried. I reached for a second mug, the nice ceramic one I usually saved for guests who never came, and tried not to think too hard about how natural this felt. How easily we'd slipped from crisis to chosen companionship here in the strange liminal space between night and morning. Morning crept in through the industrial windows of my loft, painting everything in soft grays and blues. The empty wine bottle stood between us on the coffee table, a quiet reminder of how we'd started this strange night. Mary cradled her coffee mug in both hands, her legs tucked under her on my couch. She looked more comfortable than she had any right to be on furniture I'd barely used myself. It wasn't dramatic, she said, her voice carrying that particular softness that comes with dawn confessions. That's what makes it harder to explain to people. They want to hear about fights or affairs or something concrete, but we just stopped being us. Became these polite strangers who happened to share a house. I nodded, understanding more than I probably should have. The silence gets loud after a while, doesn't it? God, yes. She took a sip of coffee, her eyes distant. Every morning passing each other in the kitchen without really speaking. Every night, both of us working late just to avoid another quiet dinner. Until one day, I realized I couldn't remember the last real conversation we'd had. The rising sun caught the rim of her mug as she set it down. Sorry, she said with a small laugh. You probably didn't expect to be hearing divorce stories at dawn when you opened your door. Better than debugging code, I offered, which earned me a genuine smile. Besides, I'm good at listening. It's easier than talking sometimes. So talk. Now, she suggested, turning toward me slightly. Tell me something real. Why coding instead of law school? Your parents must have had opinions about that. I couldn't help but laugh, though it came out more bitter than I intended. They still introduce me as Pralaw at family gatherings, as if the last 3 years were just a phase I'll grow out of eventually. That must be frustrating. I paused, searching for words I'd never quite found before. They sacrificed so much to give me opportunities. Moved halfway across the world, worked impossible hours. And I get it. They see law as stability, prestige, everything they wanted for their kids. But coding ... it's where I make sense. Where things work the way they're supposed to, if you just understand the language. Mary shifted closer on the couch, a small movement that seemed casual but felt deliberate. Her knee was almost touching mine now. And people don't work that way? Not in my experience, I admitted. Though I might not be the best judge. Haven't exactly been putting myself out there lately. The morning light caught her face differently now, highlighting shadows under her eyes I hadn't noticed before. She looked exhausted beneath her animation. But there was something appealing about seeing her this way, defenses down, no longer trying to maintain any particular image. Speaking of putting yourself out there, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Is there someone who might mind me being here at dawn? A girlfriend wondering why you're not answering texts? I shook my head. No one to mind. Haven't dated since. The thing ended badly in college. I glanced at her, pulse quickening slightly. What about you? Besides the obvious ex-husband situation, is there someone who might be wondering where you are? Not anymore, she said softly. The words carried a complex mixture of emotions, sadness certainly, but something else too. Something that felt like possibility. We sat in that moment, letting the weight of it settle between us. The sun had fully cleared the horizon now, painting my sparse apartment in warm golds that made everything feel slightly unreal. Like we'd carved out this pocket of time where normal rules didn't quite apply. I watched her trace the rim of her coffee mug with one finger, noticed how her shoulders had gradually relaxed over the hours we'd spent talking. It struck me suddenly that I couldn't remember the last time anyone had really listened to me either, had cared enough to ask follow-up questions and remember the answers. The realization made my chest tight in a way I wasn't quite ready to examine. The light had shifted again, morning sun now streaming fully through the windows, making everything feel exposed in a way that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Mary set her empty coffee mug down, running a hand through her hair in a gesture that seemed unconscious. You know what no one warns you about? She said, breaking our comfortable silence. How invisible you become after 40. Especially after divorce. It's like suddenly you're this ghost of your former self, watching everyone else live their real lives. I turned toward her, studying the way the sunlight caught the silver strands in her hair she hadn't bothered to hide. You're anything but invisible. She laughed softly, but it held an edge. Sweet of you to say, but I mean it, I interrupted, surprising myself with my directness. I've been watching you for months. The way you move through the building. Like you own it. How you never hesitate, always seem to know exactly where you're going and what you're doing. Her eyes met mine, widening slightly at the admission. That's an act, she said, but a smile played at the corners of her mouth. Most days I'm just hoping no one notices I'm making it up as I go. That's what I like about it, I said quietly. That you keep going anyway. That you make uncertainty look like confidence. It's compelling. Something shifted in her expression then, a vulnerability mixing with something harder to read. She turned more fully toward me on the couch, her knee definitely touching mine. Now, this is probably stupid, she started, her voice carrying a note of resignation. You're young enough to don't, I cut in, gentle but firm. Being young doesn't mean I don't know what I want. The air between us felt charged suddenly, like the moment before a storm breaks. She held my gaze, her breathing slightly uneven. And what's that? Instead of answering directly, because words felt too clumsy for what I wanted to express, I asked, Can I kiss you? The question hung there, delicate and dangerous as spun glass. She went very still, searching my face with an intensity that made my heart race. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours. I watched doubt and desire war in her expression, certain she was about to stand up, make an excuse about needing sleep, and walk out my door. I kept absolutely still, barely breathing, giving her space to make her choice. The sun continued its slow crawl across my floor, highlighting dust motes that danced between us like tiny stars. Everything felt suspended in that moment, balanced on the edge of something that could either shatter or transform. Mary drew in a careful breath, her eyes never leaving mine. Before you kiss me, she said softly, you need to understand something. This, she gestured between us, can't be simple. I'm not looking for simple. I'm rebuilding an entire life right now, and I honestly don't know what that looks like. Yet, she shifted slightly, but didn't move away. There would be complications, judgment, questions neither of us might be ready to answer. My son, ... She trailed off, collecting her thoughts. I'm still figuring out who I am without being someone's wife. Are you sure you want to step into all of that? I could hear what she wasn't saying too, the age difference, the neighbors, the fact that we lived in the same building. All the rational reasons this was probably a bad idea. But watching her in the morning light, more real than all those glimpses I'd collected over months of wanting, I knew my answer. Simple is overrated, I said quietly. Complicated doesn't scare me, not if it's the right kind of complicated. Something changed in her expression then, a softening around her eyes, a decision made. She leaned forward with deliberate slowness, giving me time to change my mind. But I stayed perfectly still, hardly breathing, as she closed the distance between us. The first brush of her lips against mine was careful, testing. A question more than a kiss. I let her set the pace, responding but not pushing, hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. Her hand came up to rest lightly on my shoulder, steadying herself. Then something shifted, like a dam breaking. Her fingers slid into my hair, gripping gently, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and honest. I tasted coffee and wine and morning, felt the soft sound she made against my mouth. My hand found her neck, and I could feel her pulse racing under my fingers, matching my own thundering heartbeat. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing differently. She didn't pull back far, just enough to whisper against my mouth, "Should we stop?" But even as she asked, her fingers were tracing along my jaw, learning the shape of me. The contrast between her words and actions made me dizzy, the responsible question versus the way. She couldn't seem to stop touching me. I could feel the warmth of her breath, see every detail of her face this close. The faint freckles across her nose, the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the way her lipstick had smudged slightly at one corner. My mind was spinning, trying to process that this was real. The woman I'd watched from afar for months, imagined conversations with, dreamed about, she was here, solid and warm and wanting me. But I could also see the conflict in her eyes, desire warring with doubt, responsibility wrestling with need. We stayed there, foreheads touching, sharing breath in the quiet morning light. Neither of us pulled away, but neither pushed forward. Either. It was a perfect moment of balance, everything possible, nothing decided. All our complications and consequences hung suspended between us, waiting for one of us to make the choice that would change everything. I watched emotions flicker across her face, knowing my own expression probably showed the same mix of wonder and uncertainty. The sun continued its slow climb, painting everything in shades of gold, making this feel like a dream we might wake from at any moment. But she felt too real in my hands for this to be anything but truth. "No," I said, the word coming out firmer than I'd expected. "We shouldn't stop." I watched the tension drain from Mary's shoulders, relief and desire flickering across her face. In equal measure, she was the first to move, rising smoothly from the couch and extending her hand toward me. There was nothing demanding in the gesture, just an offer, a choice being presented. The morning light caught the silver threading through her dark hair, and I found myself memorizing how she looked in that moment, still wearing that oversized university sweatshirt, barefoot, waiting. I took her hand. We moved together toward the hallway, our fingers intertwined. The apartment felt different, somehow familiar, angles transformed by this new context, by the weight of anticipation hanging in the air. Halfway to my bedroom, Mary stopped, turning to face me fully. The serious look in her eyes made my heart skip. "I need you to know something," she said, her thumb tracing absent patterns against my palm. "Tomorrow might be different. I might be different." She took a steadying breath. "I might panic, might try to pretend this didn't happen. I should be upfront about that possibility." The honesty in her voice made me love her a little right then. Not the desperate kind of love that demands forever, but the kind that appreciates someone for exactly who they are in a moment. "Tomorrow is tomorrow," I told her softly. "Right now is what we have. That's enough for me." A quiet laugh escaped, her warm and genuine. "God," she said, shaking her head slightly. "When did 25-year-olds become so wise?" "Maybe we're not all playing beer pong and making bad decisions," I replied, and was rewarded with another laugh, this one lighter. We'd reached my bedroom door. The morning sun streamed through the industrial windows, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. Mary stood in one of those bands of light, and I found myself thinking about all the mornings I'd heard her heels clicking past my door, never imagining we'd end up here. She turned to face me in the doorway, her expression open but serious. "Ah, you absolutely sure about this?" she asked, one final check. I couldn't help but smile. I was about to ask you the same thing. Same thing. "Yes," we said, almost in perfect unison, and then both laughed at the synchronicity of it. The tension broke like a fever, leaving something warmer and more certain in its wake. When she kissed me this time, it was different from our first desperate connection on the couch. This was unhurried, deliberate, a promise of time we were consciously choosing to take. Her hands framed my face with a gentleness that made my chest ache, and I drew her closer, feeling her heartbeat against mine. We stood there in the threshold, surrounded by morning light, kissing like we had all the time in the world, because in that moment we did. We were moving forward with full awareness of what we were doing, what it meant, what complications might come. But those were problems for tomorrow's versions of ourselves. Right now, in the gentle gold of dawn, we chose each other. Mary pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, and I saw everything I was feeling reflected there, desire and uncertainty, hope and fear, all tangled together into something real and honest. Her thumb brushed across my lower lip, and I caught the slight tremor in her hand. "Jamie," she whispered, my name carrying a world of meaning in those two syllables. The morning light painted my bedroom in shades of amber and gold, transforming the familiar space into something almost dreamlike. Mary moved past me into the room, her fingers still linked with mine, and I watched how the sunlight caught in her hair, creating a soft halo effect that made my breath catch. She turned to face me, and there was a tenderness in her expression that made my heart stumble. We were still fully dressed, standing in that gentle morning glow, but somehow this felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced before. "Come here," she said softly, drawing me closer. Our kisses were unhurried now, exploratory. Between each one, words spilled out naturally, as if the physical connection had opened some deeper channel of honesty between us. "Can I tell you something?" she asked, her fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder through my t-shirt. When I nodded, she continued. "I first noticed you 3 months ago. You were helping Mrs. Rodriguez from second floor with her groceries. She'd bought too much, and you just appeared, carried everything up for her. I remembered that day, though I hadn't known Mary had seen it. She reminds me of my grandmother," I admitted, "always trying to carry more than she should." Mary's smile was warm. That's exactly what caught my attention. Most people in this building barely look at each other, but you notice things, notice people. "Speaking of noticing," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "I may have occasionally timed my elevator rides hoping to run into you." Her laugh was surprised and delighted. Really, 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 really. Your perfume would linger in the elevator after you'd gone. I'd stand there trying to memorize it. She pressed her forehead to mine, still smiling. And here I thought I was being so professional and composed. Oh, you were, I assured her. Terrifyingly so. But sometimes you'd get this little crease between your eyebrows when you were checking your phone, like whatever you were reading wasn't quite right. You saw that? Her voice held a note of wonder. I saw you, I said simply. Her hand moved to Kunta. Trace the line of my shoulder, this time with more purpose. I forgot, she whispered, what it feels like to be wanted like this. Not as someone's wife, or someone's mom, or the marketing director. Just ... me. That's all I've ever seen, I told her, meaning it. Just you. She kissed me then, deeper than before, but still with that careful gentleness that made everything feel weightier, more significant. There was no rush, no desperate fumbling. Every touch felt deliberate, every response noted and treasured. When she tugged at the hem of my shirt, her hands were warm against my skin. I helped her remove it, and she spent a moment just looking at me, her fingers trailing over my collarbone, in a way that made me shiver. Jamie. She whispered my name like it was both a question and its own answer. I drew her closer, my hand settling at her waist. The soft fabric of her borrowed sweatshirt bunched under my fingers. Is this okay? I asked. She nodded, then kissed me again. More than okay. This is ... Bull quote. She paused, searching for words. This is complicated in all the right ways, and she was right. This was complicated. Our age difference, her recent divorce, the fact that we lived in the same building. But as she pressed closer, as my hand slid under her sweatshirt to find the warm skin of her back, I realized this was exactly the kind of complicated I'd been waiting for without knowing it. Each new touch was a discovery, each soft sound a revelation. We moved together with the mutual understanding that this mattered, that we were choosing this, choosing each other, with full awareness of what it meant. I see you too, she whispered against my neck, and something in my chest expanded. Almost painfully. Because that's what we'd both been missing, wasn't it? Someone who really saw us, who looked past the surface to find the person underneath. I awoke to sunlight streaming through my industrial windows, the kind of bright that meant it was well past morning. For a moment, I stayed perfectly still, processing the events of the past few hours. The sheets beside me were empty, but still held a trace of warmth, and her perfume lingered on my pillow. Then I heard it, the soft clink of cups from my kitchen, the familiar gurgle of my coffee maker. I smiled, remembering how just yesterday morning this apartment had felt too quiet. I pulled on a fresh t-shirt and sweats before padding out to the kitchen. And there she was, looking somehow both out of place and completely at home in my space. She wore yesterday's university sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a loose knot that exposed the curve of her neck. She moved through my kitchen with practiced efficiency, like she'd done this 100 times before. I watched as she expertly measured coffee beans, my special reserve beans, the ones I saved for rare occasions, into the grinder. Her movements were precise, almost meditative. Hope you don't mind, she said without turning around, somehow sensing my presence. I'm particular about coffee. I don't mind at all, I replied, leaning against the doorframe. There was something surreal about watching her navigate my morning routine. This woman who had been just a series of passing moments in elevators and hallways until last night. A careful distance hung between us now, both physical and emotional. We were testing the waters, seeing what this looked like in the harsh light of day after the intimacy we'd shared. The air felt charged with unspoken questions. The coffee maker finished its cycle with a final sputter. She reached for 2 mugs, finding them on her first try, I noticed, and poured with steady hands. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, somehow making everything feel more real. She slid 1 cup across the counter to me, the ceramic making a soft scraping sound against the surface. Our fingers didn't touch during the exchange, and I wasn't sure if that was intentional or not. We drank in comfortable silence, both facing the wall of windows that overlooked the city. Below us, the streets were coming alive with late morning activity. The sun caught the metal and glass of neighboring buildings, creating a kaleidoscope of light that danced across my kitchen walls. I watched her profile as she sipped her coffee, noting how different she looked, now not the vulnerable woman from last night or the polished professional I usually glimpsed in the hallway, but something in between. Something real. "I should go," she finally said, setting her empty cup in the sink. "Things to figure out." I nodded, understanding. There was no need to push or demand definitions. What we'd shared felt too delicate for labels just yet. She gathered her things slowly, her laptop, the empty wine bottle from last night, her phone. Each item seemed to carry the weight of our shared hours, transforming from simple objects into artifacts of something significant. At my door, she paused, one hand on the handle. She turned back to me, and I saw the same mixture of certainty and hesitation I felt reflected in her eyes. "This wasn't just about the internet," she said softly. "I know," I replied, because I did. It had never really been about the failed connection or the Tokyo presentation. Those were just the catalysts that finally brought us to where we'd been heading all along. She stepped closer then, and when she kissed me, it was different from our earlier kisses. Soft, brief, but achingly real, a punctuation mark rather than a question. Then she was gone, the door closing quietly behind her. I stood there for a moment, listening to the familiar sound of her heels clicking down the hallway, growing fainter with each step. The morning light continued to pour through my windows, illuminating the 2 coffee cups in my sink, physical proof that the night hadn't been a dream. I stood in the shower, letting hot water cascade over my shoulders, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The events of the night felt simultaneously vivid and dreamlike: her unexpected knock, the wine, the presentation, and everything that followed. Steam filled the bathroom, but I could still catch traces of her perfume on my skin. Later, stripping the sheets from my bed, I caught another wave of that scent, something elegant and subtle that I'd only experienced before in brief elevator encounters. Even my sweatshirt, discarded on the chair, held onto it. I pressed the fabric to my face for a moment, allowing myself to remember how she'd looked wearing it this morning, moving through my kitchen like she belonged there. When I finally made my way back to the kitchen, I noticed something I'd missed earlier: a folded piece of paper propped against the coffee machine. She must have written it while I was sleeping. My heart did an odd little skip as I unfolded it, taking in her elegant handwriting. The favor was never really about the internet. Thank you for knowing that. Thank you for seeing me, not my age or situation. Since we never actually exchanged names. I read it twice, then a third time, a smile tugging at my lips. Elena or Elizabeth? Evelyn? The mystery of it struck me then. We'd shared so much, been so intimate, yet hadn't exchanged that most basic piece of information. Somehow that made it feel more real, not less. We'd connected as people first, stripped of all the usual social protocols and pleasantries. You might think that would make it feel casual or meaningless, but it was the opposite. We'd seen each other clearly, without the usual masks people wear when first meeting. No small talk, no carefully curated first impressions. Just honesty and connection in the middle of the night. I picked up my phone, started to type out my normal morning message to work, then paused. For the first time since joining the startup, I called in sick. My team lead's surprise was audible. I was the guy who logged in during snowstorms and power outages. But today, I needed space to think. Spent the day in a kind of pleasant haze, alternating between replaying moments from the night and wondering what would happen next. The note felt like a good sign, but I knew what she'd said about morning being different was real too. This wasn't simple for either of us. As evening approached, I found myself growing more restless. Around 6 o'clock, I heard it, that familiar click of heels in the hallway, the sound I'd been unconsciously waiting for all these months. Her pace was the same as always, purposeful and steady. I stood at my door, hand hovering over the handle, but didn't open it. After a moment, I heard Her door close. The hours ticked by. I tried to work but couldn't focus. Every sound in the hallway made me look up. By 11:30, I had convinced myself that was it. We'd go back to being neighbors who nodded politely in the elevator, pretending last night never happened. Then, just before midnight, there was a knock. Soft but deliberate, like the night before. My heart hammered as I crossed to the door. She stood there, looking different than I'd ever seen her. Jeans and a simple t-shirt, hair loose around her shoulders. Gone was both the sharp professional armor and last night's vulnerable graduate student look. This was someone new, or maybe just more real. She looked nervous but determined. "Hi," she said with a small smile that made my chest tight. "I'm Elena, from 4B. She took a breath, then continued, "I'm terrible at simple, but I'd like to try complicated with you." I stepped back from my door, gesturing Elena inside. The same space, the same couch where everything had changed just 20 hours ago, but the energy was different now. No wine bottles, no looming deadlines, no crisis driving us together. Just two people who had seen something real in each other and wanted to explore it. "It feels different in here," Elena said, settling onto the couch. "Calmer. Good different?" I asked, sitting beside her but leaving space between us. She smiled, tucking one leg under herself to face me. "Just different. More deliberate." She paused, considering her words. "Last night was unexpected, beautiful, but this feels more honest somehow." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Because we're choosing it with clear heads." "Exactly." She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture I was starting to recognize as her gathering thoughts. "We should probably talk about what this actually means, what we're getting into." "I'd like that," I said, appreciating how she didn't shy away from the difficult conversation. "What are you worried about?" Elena let out a soft laugh. "How much time do you have?" But her tone was warm, not bitter. "The age difference, obviously. What people will think. What my son will think. He's 23, Jamie. That's going to be complicated. Have you told him about the divorce yet?" "Yes, that part he knows. He's been supportive, actually. But this?" She gestured between us. "This is different. And then there's work, my friends, the whole building, really. People love to judge what they don't understand." I considered this carefully. Does their judgment matter more than what we want? "No," she said immediately, then smiled. "Well, maybe sometimes. I'm trying to be honest here. Some days it might get to me. I might need reassurance." "I can do reassurance," I said. "But I should be honest too. I don't know exactly where this goes. I just know I want to find out." Elena reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's actually perfect. Because I don't know either. I just know that last night felt more real than anything has in years. So what do we do?" I asked. "How do we make this work?" "We take it slow," she said, then laughed as I raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I know. After last night, that's a bit rich. But slow starting now. Get to know each other properly. Like normal people dating?" "Exactly like that. Movies, dinner, conversations. That don't happen at 2 in the morning." I grinned. "Speaking of dinner, are you hungry? I know a great Thai place that delivers." We ordered food, found a movie neither of us had seen. It felt wonderfully ordinary, sitting there sharing pad thai and making fun of plot holes. Every now and then, Elena would catch my eye and smile, like she too was marveling at how natural this felt. Over the next few weeks, we built something real. Late-night talks where I learned her full name, Elena Margaret Chun, and she learned about my family. Morning coffee where we planned careful steps forward. She introduced me to her friends as Jamie from 4A and handled their questioning. Looks with practiced grace. I brought her to a startup happy hour where my colleagues tried not to stare and mostly failed. It wasn't always smooth. Sometimes the complications we'd predicted arose: raised eyebrows in the elevator, whispered conversations that stopped when we passed. But Elena met each challenge with that same directness I'd admired from afar all those months. And I found myself growing more confident. less concerned with others' opinions as we built our own understanding. When she left that first proper evening, stopping at my door for a goodnight kiss, it felt different than our previous parting. No uncertainty, no fear of morning changing everything. Just tenderness and the promise of more moments like this, complicated, real, and exactly what we'd both been looking for without knowing it. "Good night, Jamie from 4A, she whispered against my lips. "Good night, Elena from 4B, I replied. Making her laugh. As promised, it was all beautifully complicated. And we wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Thanks for sharing this quiet with me. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and tell me which moment stayed with you. A new story arrives every day at the same hour.